There was a time when putting on a MAGA hat was a political statement. It meant loyalty to Donald Trump. It meant loyalty to a movement. And for some of Trump's most aggressive allies, it was almost a badge of identity. But now, one of the people who helped build that political world is saying something very different. Marjorie Taylor Greene, once one of Donald Trump's loudest defenders, recently said she can't remember the last time she saw someone wearing a MAGA hat or Trump shirt. That may sound like a throwaway comment. It isn't, because coming from Greene, the timing matters. She has already left Congress. She has publicly broken with Trump. She has accused him of betraying the America First agenda she once championed, and now she is openly questioning whether the political brand that helped make Trump dominant is still what it once was. So, is MAGA actually dead? Not necessarily, but something very important has changed. And if you look at Greene's words, alongside everything that has happened between her and Trump, you can see a much bigger story unfolding. Today, we're breaking down what MTG actually said, why it matters, and what her dramatic break with Trump could reveal about the future of the movement that once seemed nearly unstoppable. Marjorie Taylor Greene's latest remark came in response to discussions surrounding a Trump-branded store reportedly going out of business. Greene responded with a striking observation. She said she couldn't remember the last time she saw someone wearing a MAGA hat or Trump shirt. Now, let's be precise. That statement is not proof that MAGA has disappeared. Trump merchandise is obviously still visible in American politics, and one person's personal observation cannot establish the strength or weakness of an entire political movement. But that's not really why this moment matters. It matters because of who said it. This isn't a longtime Democratic critic of Trump. This isn't a political commentator who has spent years attacking MAGA. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene. For years, Greene was one of Trump's most recognizable congressional allies. She defended him aggressively, she embraced the MAGA identity, and she became one of the most recognizable faces of Trump's political coalition. But today, she's outside Congress, she's openly criticizing Trump, and she is increasingly presenting herself as someone who believes the movement has lost its way. That's a remarkable transformation. And it didn't happen overnight. To understand why this matters, we have to go back to the relationship between Greene and Trump. For much of Greene's congressional career, the two were closely aligned. Trump's political movement gave Greene an enormous national platform, and Greene became one of the politicians most closely associated with the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. But eventually, the relationship began to fracture. Greene started criticizing Trump's policies, particularly on foreign affairs. She argued that the administration was moving away from the America First principles that had attracted many of Trump's supporters in the first place. Then came the public fallout. Trump withdrew his support for Greene, and Greene eventually announced that she would leave Congress. Her resignation became official in January 2026. And that was more than just the end of a congressional career. It represented something much larger. A politician who had once been deeply embedded inside Trump's political coalition was now saying that the coalition itself had betrayed its own promises. And Greene didn't stop there. This summer, Greene's criticism became even more explicit. In August, she appeared alongside other figures associated with the America First world, including Tucker Carlson and Thomas Massie. The message was unmistakable. Greene said, "We said no more foreign wars and we meant it." Then she accused Trump of betraying that promise. And she followed it with a phrase that got people paying attention. The movement has begun. Think about what that means. If Greene believes the current Republican leadership has abandoned the principles that brought these voters into the movement, then the political battle isn't simply Democrats versus Republicans. It's becoming something more complicated. It is a fight inside the MAGA coalition itself. And that could become extremely important heading toward the midterms. Because movements don't collapse simply because one politician leaves. They weaken when supporters begin asking a different question. Is this still what we signed up for? That is the question Greene increasingly appears to be asking. Now, let's address the headline. MTG finally admitted it. Dad. That is a powerful phrase. But we shouldn't confuse a dramatic headline with a proven political fact. There is no evidence that MAGA as a movement is literally dead. In fact, political movements rarely disappear that cleanly. They evolve, they split, they rebrand, they change leaders. And sometimes, the most important political battles happen when a movement begins fighting over what its original message actually meant. That's what makes Greene's current position so interesting. She isn't saying, "I don't believe in America First anymore." She's saying almost the opposite. Her argument is that Trump has moved away from it. That distinction is critical. Greene is trying to separate the MAGA identity from Trump himself. And that is potentially one of the most dangerous things that can happen to a political leader. Because Trump's greatest political strength has always been the ability to make himself synonymous with the movement. Trump wasn't merely the candidate. For millions of supporters, Trump was MAGA. But if politicians begin telling those same voters, you can be America first without following Trump, then the political equation changes. This brings us to the real question. Who owns MAGA? Donald Trump, the Republican Party, the voters, or the politicians who helped build the coalition? For years, the answer seemed obvious. Trump was the center of gravity. Republican candidates wanted his endorsement. Conservative media wanted his audience. And politicians understood that challenging Trump could be politically dangerous. But now, we're seeing cracks. Greene is not alone in criticizing aspects of Trump's foreign policy. Other America First figures have also argued that the Republican Party needs to return to a more restrained foreign policy agenda. And this is where the Greene-Carlson-Massey alignment becomes significant. They aren't necessarily creating a new political party tomorrow. There is no reason to claim that. But they are demonstrating something important. There is an audience for an America First message that is willing to criticize Trump. That audience may be smaller than Trump's overall coalition. It may be fragmented. It may not even agree on everything. But it exists. And political leaders notice audiences. And now we get to another reason Greene's recent comments are receiving so much attention. In August, Greene claimed that senior Trump administration officials were discussing the potential use of nuclear weapons against Iran. She characterized the possibility as pure evil. But there is an important caveat. Greene did not publicly provide evidence identifying the officials involved, and there is no public evidence establishing that Trump has authorized or decided to use nuclear weapons against Iran. That distinction matters, because responsible political coverage has to separate an allegation from a confirmed fact. But regardless of whether Greene's claim is ultimately substantiated, her political position is unmistakable. She is portraying herself as a former Trump ally who believes the administration is moving toward policies that contradict the anti-war message she says voters were promised. And that brings us back to the central conflict. What happens when the people who helped build a political movement start accusing its leader of betraying the movement? That's when loyalty becomes the battlefield. For years, Trump's political strength has been connected to loyalty. His supporters have often defended him through scandals, controversies, investigations, and political attacks. But Greene's story demonstrates the other side of that equation. Loyalty can work both ways. Greene has essentially argued that if politicians expect voters to remain loyal, leaders also have to remain loyal to the promises that brought those voters into the coalition. That's why her criticism isn't simply, "I don't like Trump anymore," it's much more strategic. She's saying, Trump betrayed the people who believed in America first. That is a fundamentally different argument, and it creates a political opening, because if Trump is no longer the unquestioned definition of America first, then other politicians can compete for the same voters. That's potentially where the real threat lies, not in someone defeating Trump overnight, but in the possibility that the coalition begins to fragment around different versions of what MAGA was supposed to mean. And then there is the symbolism of the merchandise. Greene's comment about MAGA hats may sound trivial, but political branding is powerful. A hat isn't just a hat in American politics. It can be an identity marker. It tells you what political team someone wants to be associated with. So when a former MAGA insider publicly says she can't remember the last time she saw someone wearing one, it creates a question. Has the brand lost some of its cultural power? Again, we can't prove that from one comment. But we can observe something else. Greene herself is deliberately moving away from the traditional Trump-centered identity. Her messaging increasingly focuses on America first, anti-war politics, and opposition to what she sees as Republican establishment priorities. That is not an accident. It is political positioning, and it suggests that Greene believes there is a future for the movement beyond the Trump personality. Whether voters agree with her is an entirely different question. And now comes the part that could matter most, the 2026 elections. According to Time, at least 83 House and Senate incumbents are not returning to Congress, pointing toward an unusually high level of turnover in the next Congress. That creates an environment where political coalitions can shift quickly. If Republican voters remain strongly aligned behind Trump, his influence could continue to dominate the party. But if a meaningful portion of the America First base begins separating Trump's personality from the movement's policies, Republican primaries could become much more complicated. Candidates could start competing over questions like, who is really America first? Who supports the movement's original promises? Who is willing to challenge Republican leadership? And perhaps most importantly, who does the voter trust? That is a very different political battle from the one Republicans were fighting several years ago. So, is MAGA dead? No, not based on the evidence we have. But something may be dying. And that something could be the idea that MAGA and Donald Trump are permanently inseparable. Because when one of Trump's former allies begins saying, she rarely sees the MAGA branding anymore, when she says, Trump betrayed America first, when she leaves Congress after a public rupture with him, And when she starts talking about a movement beyond the current leadership, you are no longer looking at a simple political disagreement. You're looking at a fight over who gets to define the future of the movement. And that fight could become much bigger than Marjorie Taylor Greene, because political movements eventually face the same question. What happens when the leader who created the coalition is no longer enough to hold the coalition together? Maybe MAGA survives Trump. Maybe it transforms into something completely different. Maybe Trump's critics inside the movement fail to build anything meaningful at all. We don't know yet. But one thing is clear. The old political map is changing. And the most interesting part isn't whether MAGA is literally dead. It's whether the people who once treated Trump as the movement itself are beginning to realize that a movement can outlive its leader. That is the story to watch. Because if that shift becomes real, the biggest political battle may not be between Democrats and Republicans. It may be over what America First actually means and who gets to claim it. What do you think? Is MAGA actually losing its grip, or is this simply another chapter in the movement's evolution? Let me know your take in the comments. And if you want sharp, fact-based political analysis without the noise, subscribe to ASN Post, because this story is far from over.